Oh, yeah, we're good friends with Sherry and Roger.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm David.
Hi,
I'm
Evan.
Denise.
Thank you, Roger, for coming here.
These actually fills in for my carpentry and did things while I'm not there.
So that's what you do.
On the side, so seasonal stuff. The main way of life.
If you figure it out.
Yeah.
I could tell you stories about that.
Oh. It's a good place to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
It's just something, it's just litter everywhere.
Yeah, so we'll always communication.
How's the lake looking today, Jim? Looking good over there?
Good.
Nice. Sweet.
Lots of water.
Yeah, right.
Route 15 is actually flooded over in Rockwood. There's like 6 inches of water on
I
it.
heard.
Mhm.
I heard.
Yeah.
Well,
And I'll tell you.
yeah, I think it's saturated.
Canvas guy.
Yeah,
Passable or no?
Constable,
Yeah.
right there.
Well, it's the opposite. No, we're gonna do this.
Right, that's, I wasn't, I'm not sure, I feel bad about that.
But the place where you definitely want to.
I just went off.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll tell you later.
There's one dead street right over the road,
Chris.
you just have to go down, but just before, like around the
Chris.
northern gate,
Yep.
it's like a place where off the it's like, there was enough room to sort of skid by on
Little
it.
fuzz, little fuzz.
It wasn't too bad.
That will usually what it says, it's not far from Grayson House.
Right.
They're usually pretty tight.
When I say, I mean, it was close, not like right next to it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
You see that short?
No, I
Zoom, that's the best way to do it, man. I said, do that, do this.
Are they gonna have to?
Oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
like to call a meeting to order at 6:01. Article 1, R.H.R. Smith and Company CPAs to be present, to present their report of the 2021 fiscal year audit review of assessors' questions. Attorney Tim Woodcock also to be present. This time I turn it over to Tim Woodcock.
So good evening, everybody. I'm Tim Woodcock. I'm an attorney with Eaton Peabody. And for a number of years now, I've been counsel to the Forks. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of how that works, I'm on call for the Forks. So they only call me up when they need legal advice. So there might be, be a long time when I don't hear from them, when nothing's really going on, everything's quiet. But when something pops up where they need some specific legal advice, they call me. And I either do the work myself or I find somebody in our firm who can do it, because it's a fairly large firm out of Danvers, as some of you know. And so what's brought us here tonight is the management letter that Keel Hood wrote to the board on July 14 of 2022. I think most of you are quite familiar with that letter. When it came to me, I had to look at that letter very closely, and there was certainly a lot in there to cause concern. And so as I looked at the letter, it was broken into a series of parts. First, it laid out a series of accounting standards. So the first page is really kind of laying out a series of standards that Mr. Hood was applying to the audit that he was doing for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. And as I reviewed the letter, it appeared to me that what he was pointing to was a series of failures in what we would call best practices. And he did, and this is an important point, he did at various points use the word fraud. And I'm going to tell you how I interpreted that. And just so everybody has an understanding of this, I wasn't always a private attorney. At one time, I was a federal prosecutor. So when I see the word fraud, I have an understanding of what that means. So what I was looking for there with that word was evidence of some serious wrongdoing. And what I was seeing in the letter was that as I viewed it, Mr. Hood was essentially sounding an alarm that some of the practices that were being employed were not sufficient to guard against fraud, that they would not alert the folks in the Forks government as to whether something was going wrong. But I did not see that he actually said anyone had committed any fraud. So, but this was a serious letter. And so what we had to do was look at it very closely and take it very seriously. And I think, as most of you are familiar with the correspondence in this case, his July 14 letter generated a letter out of the Board of Assessors here, which essentially acknowledged his letter and responded to it in three ways. One was some of his criticisms were accepted. They thought that he had made good points and practices should be corrected. Others were not accepted. And a third category were questions that arose out of the July 14 letter for which they didn't have answers. When I say they didn't have answers, I didn't have answers either. And so Mr. Hood had a contract with the Forks, and under that contract, we were looking for answers. And I should say at about this point, I was aware that not only were we looking for answers on behalf of the Forks, but I was also hearing from the Attorney General's office and the State Auditor's office. And they wanted answers. So we sent this letter out, which many of you are familiar with, on August 11 to Mr. Hood, and we sought information from him. We sought clarification from him on a number of things. We did get some responses from him in early September and late August. In some respects, he addressed his July 14 letter. In other respects, he raised things that weren't in his July 14 letter. And then he wrote to us in early September, and he said that he was done, that the audit, that his work on the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021 was done. Well, that wasn't sufficient, because we still had questions that required answers. And the auditor, who had been retained by the board pursuant to contract, was not going to do any more work on that audit. And so I had questions that I had to answer, given my role as the attorney on this issue before the board. The board had questions, the Attorney General's office had questions, the state auditor had questions, and the person who might have been able to answer the questions wasn't answering them. So that left us in a bit of a quandary. And what we ended up doing was, when we recognized that we're not gonna get the full story from Mr. Hood on this, then we had to go out and find somebody who we felt was competent to do it. Now, that could only be another certified public accountant, and we looked for somebody who had really vast experience in the realm of municipal accounting. You know, not just any accountant was gonna do. It had to be somebody who had a lot of experience in the world of municipal accounting. And so I asked around within my firm and outside my firm as to who might be able to help us with that, and I was directed to RHR Smith and Associates. And frankly, I felt very fortunate. I'll tell you, if you ever find yourself in a position like that, there are not many accountants who do this kind of work. This is to find somebody with a level of real expertise in the realm of municipal accounting. It's not that easy to do. And I think we were very fortunate that Ron Smith agreed to help us with this matter. And essentially what we needed to do was try to get a review of the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021 finances, so that we had answers, the AG had answers, the state auditor had answers, and you folks had answers. And I would say, I know many of you have had a lot of concerns about this, and I think it's understandable that you would. In fact, it would be surprising if you didn't, given the nature of the July 14, 2022 letter from Mr. Hood. And so I'm hopeful that tonight, I realize it's been a while, but these things can take time, that tonight with Mr. Smith here, we'll be able to get a better perspective on this whole series of issues that Mr. Hood raised. Now, I might add that Ron Smith has prepared a report, and he has sent that report out, but actually, I think it arrived in my emails. I was on the way over here, so I haven't actually seen it yet, and we will have to review it, but we do anticipate making that available to the public very soon. But at this point, we wanted to make sure that we had Mr. Smith meet with you, whoever from the town wanted to come, as I knew many of you were interested, and the board knew many of you were interested. And so he's here tonight to provide you with a view, a summary of the review that he has done, and put that in front of you and address questions that you may have. So at this point, I would turn it over to Ron Smith.
Good evening. Hope you don't mind, I'm tired, I can't stand up. I'm actually laboring a torn meniscus, so I'm just gonna sit right here and drink a little water. I'm Ron Smith, I'm principal with RHR Smith and Company. I work with 50 other professionals. I believe we do over half the municipalities in the state of Maine. So I've been doing it for about 35 years and received a call, oh my God, sometimes back early part of this year, and I don't think it was until March when we were actually able to physically get here. So for the past 3 months, we've been working with your town and trying to, understand and pick up understand the 21 audit, kind of pick up where that left off. And we have 2 engagements with the town. One was the first one was to go back and review the 21 and answer some of the questions that the Board of Assessors had. We've prepared our letter, as Tim alluded to. I'm here to talk about anything in that letter tonight. The town's still reviewing it. The other engagement that we have is to do the 22 audit, which we're still in the process of doing. So I'm here to talk about the 21 engagement. We have a letter of engagement to look into 7 areas of the town going back to 21. And a lot of it, stemmed around payroll, budgeting practices, cash receipting, cash disbursements, reconciliations, accounting functions, and best practices. And in that letter, it'll actually state the scope of our service, within that letter. So, and to sum it up, I think that we see that the town had a lot of best practice issues for sure, and that there needs to be a better way to process information internally so it can be transparent to its voters is probably the best, the constituents of the town. I think that would be, the best way that I can certainly start the conversation. There were some serious concerns, as Tim said, that we certainly noted, we see, we agree with. We added some more serious concerns on top of it, to the point where, that the town's implemented some policies right now, I think, to address some of those matters, but I think that there's a lot of work to do in this town, I really do. And we've had conversations on kind of what some of those other matters would be, that the town would change some of its practices to, and I think that there's gonna be a lot more continued conversation, with the town, plantation, to really kind of, quite frankly, right its fiscal ship and get it pointed in the right direction, so that we're not sitting in a room here talking about some ugly practices and, some accusations and some bad words that, that we never wanna talk about, fraud that was kind of alluded to and, in a management letter back in 21. Yeah, I mean, we issued a 5-page letter. We were as critical, probably if not more critical, than the prior auditor. We have communicated with the prior auditor. We have communicated with the previous auditor prior to that auditor. So we've talked to a lot of people. We've talked to the state auditor. We've talked to some of the people that are aware of what's going on here in the Forks Plantation, but we haven't talked to you. And that's who I work for. So this board engages me to do my audit. We certainly have some professional standards, but I hear here I'm a public accountant, I represent you. So I'm here to answer any questions that you may have all of me and, and get this town to heal and get it pointed in the right direction, so that we can go forward for sure. And yeah, I'll certainly just start with that.
Well, I can't stand silence with all the questions people have, so I'll ask one. With Mr. Hood's initial management summary, he talked about checks that had been issued that weren't on the warrant, that had been issued by Joyce Longley to herself, and then also to Judith. And then that somehow, at some point, these were paid back, but it was very unclear to me exactly what the checks were for and how they were paid back. And just to me, when I read this, and I'm looking for clarification, it kind of looks like the town's money was being used as a bank. In other words, money was being taken out and then put back. Now, I may be wrong, but that area is very confusing to me.
Sure. So I'll try to explain what I saw and explain what I read, in that letter. I'm assuming you're referring to his July 2022 letter, his management letter.
Well, there's two that he wrote on the 14th.
Yeah.
That dated the 14th. The one is his initial one, then there's a response, and then there's another one that
Yeah.
came later, which is actually still dated the 14th.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sent on the 14th, it
Yeah.
came after the response.
Yeah.
And it's
So,
different than.
and it is different from the first one.
It is.
But I think he.
Yeah, I
maybe-
got them both. I think the points are clear in both of them.
I think he references this, these
Disparity.
transactions in both of them.
So I'll try to answer that question, the way that I, read his comments and my observations and through my work that I've done through 21. So your your treasurer, you know, had issued checks to herself and to Ms. Hutchinson, yes, those checks were all signed by that treasurer. A lot of those checks were for compensation. Some of those checks, and the town really doesn't delineate how it pays for compensation, but we went back 7 years, and clearly during some of those years, some of those checks that were issued were advanced compensation. So what does that mean? If, you know, if your second assessor, tax collector, and I forget what the other position is, going to be paid $17,000 in one fiscal year, in fact, that position could have been paid $22,000 in that fiscal year. And then the next question is okay, let's just keep taking it up through, because you know, his comment also further goes on to talk about how in a future budget that could be paid back for, and that's actually alluded in the audit report as well by both auditors. And when you look at it in the totality of 7 years, the advancements have been paid back. Matter of fact, that one of the individuals actually paid back, you know, a sum that was given to her by the auditor, and the other one wasn't, is the best way I can say that. The checks that were written to your treasurer were signed by your treasurer. Some of these checks, if not many of them, weren't on public warrants. Many of these checks weren't in your accounting software and were subsequently posted to the accounting software, in some cases 8 or 9 months later. And that's not a good practice. You know, so certainly to kind of expand on that, yeah, we saw that, we concur that it's real. We concur that some of these payroll checks, the town didn't have a policy for that. Statutorily, it could have. If they did, it hasn't been given to or provided to us. You know, that statute says you don't need a majority of the Board of Selectmen or a Board of Assessors, you just need one. But absent of that policy, which the plantation didn't have, certainly they weren't adhering to even statute. You know, so whether or not it was a majority or one, a lot of those checks were dispersed without the, for lack of a better way to say it, the statutorial preference, you know, in the state to issue money out of the government coffers.
How were they paid back? So I understand basically what we've got is a cash advance, let's suppose $8,000 yearly salary for one of these positions, okay? So you take the $8,000 in advance, as a cash advance on your salary. How is that recorded and how is it paid back?
So we actually went through again 7 years, and it was certainly, you know, for lack of a better word, there was no logic to how the checks were distributed, okay? Because there were many checks that were distributed. How it would be paid back is if in one fiscal year somebody was to be paid $17,000, the next fiscal year they got paid $13,000. Okay? The next fiscal year they may have got paid $16,000. The next fiscal year they may have got paid $19,000. And that certainly, it was all over the board through that 7 years. But at the end of those 7 years, it looks like all the advances were paid back and then some. One of them, one of the individuals has not. But we don't believe that, you know, after the 7 years, that individual owes the town. But when asked to pay the town back and cited in the audit report, that individual did not pay the town back. One of them did.
Go ahead and ask us, I'm not distracted now.
So, if I understand you correctly, my concern was the accounting that apparently was done on Joyce Longley's home computer or personal computer. Is that what you were referencing?
There was accounting that was done outside this office to the nature of what it looks like.
Right.
I'm not aware. All I know is when it got into this office, I know what that looks like.
And so then it was sort of reconstructed after the fact.
I'd say that's a fair word.
Okay, and that certainly is not best practice.
That is not a best practice. That is cited in our letter.
Okay.
And how were taxes, you know, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, state federal tax, how were the taxes taken out of those taxes?
They were paid as the checks were paid. So if in one quarter, whatever the compensation that was paid, because remember, it might not be an advance. It's only an advance when it goes over $17,000 for that one individual, because they were holding 3 statutory positions. So once it gets over $17,000, whatever was paid, you know, during that quarter, the taxes were taken out and filed on a 941. We believe, we can't find a couple of 941s, but we believe with the 941s, that's consistent with the checks that were actually issued to the employees. And at the end of the year, the W-2 is consistent with what was paid during the course of the year.
In our town warrant every year for town meeting, there's always an article that says that we vote for the town to pay the social security taxes that are owed. Well, we have to pay our share, but then the person receiving the compensation has to pay their share, correct?
Those shares were paid.
Are they paying that?
Those shares were paid.
That's never been clear to me.
Yeah, they've been paid.
Okay.
Yeah, they've been paid. Well, and again, I can't attest to a couple of quarters
No,
during
but
this period,
it
because I
just,
can't find
but
that
it
information.
just, that's always been confusing to me,
Yeah.
because the town just isn't supposed to pay their share and our share.
Yeah, no, the town would pay its share, the
That's-
employees,
that's an-
whatever the compensation. Paychecks were processed.
Okay.
Some were done manually, some were done through your software.
Okay.
All this we're talking about, is this the kind of practices and things that go on routinely in the work, you find this kind of stuff
Yes,
all the time?
yes, but
What
hear me,
counts
but it
for it?
also leads to conversations exactly like this, we don't like talking about it.
Right.
So,
I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it just seems like people that don't really either understand or don't care enough to do their job properly. That's what it looks like. Okay, because these people have been doing this a long time, and it just seems to me like, you know, if, that the practices, which everybody admits were unorthodox, they're, you know, not best practices, and I don't, you know, just, everybody knows that, and here we are.
My other
There's no
question,
accountability, that's the biggest problem we have here.
I have another question. I believe Mr. Hood has done the audit for several years, is that correct?
I believe 4 or 5.
Okay, but these issues weren't raised in prior audits. So, was it not going on, or?
To the urgency of the management letter that I read, I haven't seen one prior to that. To the, some of the poor practices and the financial
Yeah.
statements, they were alluded to in the financial statements. That's how we picked them up. We went back to even before Mr. Hood was, and
Right.
saw some of the poor practices that I mentioned.
There's language in the 2018 and 2019 audits that do agree with the
Correct.
same.
And 17.
Okay, yeah.
I have a question about the conflict of interest. Now in this case, I was told by Keel Hood that it was actually a conflict of interest for Judith to actually be voting on what is happening with the audit that was pending. Is that true, or?
I would need more context to that question.
Okay, so, we had several meetings about the audit that Keel Hood did. And we had several meetings, the town had several meetings. But Keel said that Judith wasn't allowed to vote at these assessors' meetings that they had because they pertained to her.
Was she voting as assessor or tax collector? That's kind of I'm just trying to understand
An
what was the
assessor.
context, okay.
She was voting as an assessor
Yeah,
on what was going on in the audit, but it was pertaining to her. So would that not be a conflict of interest?
I just don't know, and it would just be irresponsible of me to comment, you know, on what was being voted on if I just don't know what the questions that are being voted on, so.
Do you know what he was referencing, Denise?
I don't,
Specifically? What the
it
meeting
was-
date was?
what the what?
The meeting date?
I don't have the meeting dates, I don't have, I just know that he said that Judith wasn't supposed to be voting on audit issues because the audit pertained to her, and as an assessor, it was kind of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, just speaking from a legal perspective on that, you would need more context for that.
Mm-hmm.
There are, because I did see in, some of Mr. Hood's responses, the ones in response to the August 11 letter, that raised conflict issues. But you really need more context for that, because if the broad question is, can Judith vote on the audit, that's pretty broad. So for example, when we couldn't get more complete answers out of Mr. Hood, which was preferable, that's what we were looking for, was more information from him. He was the one who was identifying these issues, and it would have been preferable if we got the more detail out of him. When we couldn't get the additional detail out of him, and we had to retain a new auditor, I think Judith participated in retaining the new auditor. I don't see that as being a conflict. So I would need more context from what Mr. Hood was talking about in order to comment on your question myself. The way conflict issues can arise in a number of different ways, and oftentimes what happens is, I'm speaking generally, if somebody on an elected body like this is seen as having a conflict and there's an issue that affects their interest in some way that is potentially not permissible, then that's raised, it's identified, and then the elected body has an opportunity to vote on whether it is in fact a conflict. And that is something that typically the elected body would do if it's properly raised. And sometimes you find situations in which somebody's on an elected body and a conflict is raised, and the elected body votes, yeah, there is a conflict, and then what happens is the person with the conflict doesn't stop serving. They can step down into the public well along with the rest of the public. They may even be able to comment on it. What they're conflicted from doing is voting on it. So there are all kinds of distinctions with respect to conflicts, and so that's why we would need more context from Mr. Hood on that.
And I'd be more than happy to provide that, but I'm going back, I mean, we're going right into conflict. I go back to the related party. Clearly, we identify a related party. That's the first step in what I would look at. And whether or not there's a conflict, I would just need more information.
I believe what Mr. Hood was referring to was the fact that there wasn't a lien put on Judith's property for 2 tax years where she didn't pay her taxes. So he said that because there was a response back from the assessors saying that it was approved by the board, but
I can speak to that. I can speak to that comment. Would you like me to speak to that comment?
Absolutely.
So I don't think that there's any question that there were some issues, with one of your elected officials, who's also the tax collector. I just don't like to mention names, but who's also the tax collector, where I understand that there was a meeting held with the assessors about the ability to pay their property tax bill before a lien was filed. I understand that according to the conversation is that one of the other assessors will not recall what happened. The other one, I'm just telling you what I heard.
he denies it.
Yeah.
I've spoken-
Shouldn't there be meeting minutes?
What's that? Yeah, listen, so just let me finish,
Yeah, I
please.
will. Yeah.
So one of the people that I talked to said that they can't recall what happened, yea or nay. One of the other people says that is exactly what happened. We can't find any written documentation of any minutes that supports even a conversation taking place. That I can tell you, so.
I'm a nurse, if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
So we haven't seen any documentation.
Oh, that's the way it goes.
And
In my
I
line of
spoke
work,
with
if
that
it's
same
not
person.
documented, it didn't happen.
And I think the bigger issue on that is something that we raised in our letter, and we've advised the plantation clearly that the position of assessor and tax collector should be separated forever going forward to begin with.
Thank you.
Bingo.
I don't know who I address this question to, but it seems like we have some things that I, as a taxpayer, are concerned about going forward. I don't like the fact that we don't have a determined time when payroll is paid. I mean, you don't work for a company and just draw salary whenever and however you wanna do it. There has to be some kind of determination as to.
That's changed now subsequent, I think, to that.
I've
that
not been
practice has
informed
changed.
of that, it's like.
I'll let the
But
assessors.
I
do
guess
that.
the second part of my question is, how do we, as townspeople, I mean, we need to be aware of this, and we need to be allowed to have some say in how we want it done. I mean, when do we do that? How do we do that? Does it have to be at a town meeting? Does it have to go on a warrant? How,
Doesn't have to be at a town meeting, doesn't have to go on a warrant, and I'm sure of that. But here's what I'm also sure of, the fact that you have no policy or procedure that allows you any sum certain to, or date certain to pay that comment, that's a problem.
Well, of
And
course it
here's
is.
typically what we'll find out too, from some municipalities. I'm in a rodeo like this right now. Person gets paid $20,000. Person takes $10,000 on July 1 and takes the other $10,000 on January 1. Person resigns on August 1.
that's the problem.
So there are some problems, but we see, and again, our letter alludes to the fact of having some kind of policy followed by a
It seems
procedure.
like, as a person on the board, you would want a policy to protect yourself.
And this has been a long-standing practice for this plantation.
So are these policies that are gonna be in place, is it a charter, is it gonna be a written document?
A charter would be completely up to the plantation and its residents, I can tell you that. So that's a whole
So
statutory
you can
process
have,
to
you
go
can
through.
have a charter as a plantation?
So there's some statutory reference to that charter.
Okay.
So there's some statutory reference, I'd have to look and see, where, in the charter statute, excuse me, in the plantation statute
Okay.
about a charter. But a charter can operate the same way as a municipality. My point was, you don't need a charter, you need internal policies and procedures to do
Okay,
this.
so that's step number one.
Yep,
And will they be written down so that we can refer to them?
our letter says absolutely.
Because if you look at main statutes, it's very difficult to find specific statutes
You
that
won't find it.
address
You won't find it in one
plantations.
place, yeah, so, and again, then you got statute, then you have best practice, common
Yes.
practice. Just because it doesn't allude to it in statute, doesn't mean that it's not prudent to do here in your government.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we've recommended in our letter is clearly time to look at, put everything on the table and document them going forward.
Then we can refer to it and say, this is, yeah, that's perfect.
I can't believe it isn't done.
So basically what you're saying, these are recommendations, but the board does not actually have to follow through with them?
These are recommendations, they don't have to follow through my
That's what
recommendations.
I'm hearing from you, correct?
Mhm.
So nobody, unless the board implements them, or somehow, all you're doing is making recommendations, and you're telling us what your recommendations are, but it doesn't mean that we, or the board, or the plantation,
That's all I'm
will
doing.
follow through.
By your
I'm
vote,
doing
by
back.
your vote,
Pardon me?
by your vote.
I understand, that's the voting part, but how do you, who's the executive? Who's the enforcer? Who's to,
Yeah. That's right.
You are.
so, like she said, how do we get that on the ballot? How do we get that in the conversation? How do we make that happen?
That's my question. What is next?
Is it in an
Well,
article?
let me just make this observation. Going back to this July 14, 2022 letter, there were a series of practices that Mr. Hood identified that fell short of what we would call best practices. We've been talking about some of those here tonight. From my perspective, and I think from the board's perspective, they were not in a position to identify all the ways in which the practices fell short of best practices. That's why we brought Ron Smith in. And as you can tell from his presentation here, he's got a really broad experience in the realm of municipal auditing. And so one of the things we were looking for in his audit, which we will, is his review of 2021, is a list of how you can come up with practices that will avoid the risks that Mr. Hood was identifying. So you'll have before you a letter that will identify shortcomings in the long-standing practices and should give you something of a roadmap. Ron can tell me if I'm wrong about that, to give you a roadmap to the kinds of procedures that you could implement that would cure those shortfalls.
You're not answering my question, you're giving me what Ron just said. Who is gonna make sure that these are implemented?
Well, you've got an elected.
When and how?
Well, look, I don't wanna speak for the elected officials here, but essentially, this report that Ron has prepared, it's come out, we're going to be looking at it, you folks will get to see it, and what procedures it, ought to be adopted is up to your elected officials. You'll be part of that process.
And they've assured me they're gonna sit down with me. So,
My other question is, are we going to, we have a town meeting July 17th. Are we going to get this? I mean, I don't want the letter on the 16th. I mean, we have to have this information to go forward at town meeting. We have to have some of this information to know how we're supposed to go. So when are we going to get the letter?
one, I would hope you get it by the
I was
17th.
hoping we would have it tonight.
Yeah, I hope you get it, but, so, just so I'm clear, I'm here to talk about anything in that letter, you know, and it's up to your elected officials, I think in fairness to them to review it,
Right.
you know, talk amongst themselves.
Well, I have no
and
problem
get
with
back.
that, I just thought that would all get done before. I thought, we were told we were going to have a meeting tonight, and all of our questions were going to be answered, and we were going to.
Here we are.
But we don't know what's in the
Here we are.
letter.
But
We don't know what's in the
just what the
letter.
questions are, because we haven't
Seen the
seen
letter.
the answers.
How long have they had the letter
So where's
that
the
you
report?
drafted?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Where's the report?
It's not done, I mean.
We haven't received it, though, we haven't looked at it.
Yeah, they have not had a chance to review and discuss with me, so, and they literally just got it today.
But my question is, I hope we aren't going to get this on the 16th and have a town meeting on the 17th. There are definitely issues there that townspeople have a right to
That's why we're here.
develop some kind, we don't know what the letter says, Sandy.
I haven't looked at it either.
No, I understand that. My only question is, when do you anticipate us getting this letter? This information? That's what I would like you to tell me.
Yeah, we haven't even discussed the, Chris didn't
This
even
is
know
what,
we had
this is
one.
the kind of answers we always get. We haven't discussed it. We don't know. It's,
How about 2 days, 3 days, something?
I think they said that they were gonna review it together,
Right.
as these guys are, and then once it's approved,
Here's what I'm sure, it's not gonna change on my end, and that's why I'm here to answer any questions you
well,
guys
I
got.
understand that, but I'm sure once we see the letter, we're going to
Yeah.
have more questions. There must be things addressed in there that we haven't thought of ourselves.
Yeah, and I can't answer that.
And then we have to figure out a way to correct the wrongs. I mean, to correct the practice, to better the practices.
But remember, when you go to town meeting, you're not
Yeah.
voting on practices, you're voting
We're
on a
voting on
level.
individuals.
You're voting on individuals and a
That's
level of
correct.
authority to spend money.
Yes, we are, but it would help us if there was more transparency. There are still people in the plantation that don't understand the whole situation as it is. And how we go forward for it not to happen again. That's really the concern, is that the board should want things to protect themselves, we should want transparency as voters.
My advice would be, easily said, they're not gonna like to hear this, but here's my advice tonight, again, just me doing this for 35 years.
Right.
I'd delay your town meeting and use the 17th
That's
as an
fine with me.
opportunity to review the letter and talk
Yes.
about that, and then have
That's
town meeting 2 weeks
great.
later.
I like that, that's fine by me.
Yeah.
I feel like, this, set of rules or whatever you wanna call them, we aren't the first plantation in Maine. It seems like we should be able to, this should already be spelled out, best practices, what a plantation should, what rules should be followed. When I was working here, and I've worked for, a couple of other towns, I was told, we aren't Emden, we aren't Madison, we are the Forks, and we basically get to do things the way we're doing them. And I feel like there are, there should be a formal set of rules that we can depend on.
You won't get any disagreement with me out of that, but here's what I'm gonna tell you, there's a lot of Forks Plantation out there, a lot of municipalities in a similar boat you're in.
But can't we just say, what do they do? I mean,
Yeah.
there's gotta be
I don't think
somebody
it
that's
works, I
doing it
truly
right.
don't think, I am not a one size fits all, just
Okay.
because it works to your next town, or your town to your right, your left, above, below, I'm not a fan of that. What I'm a fan of, who are you, look in the mirror, how do we do things?
Right.
So, and there's plenty of blueprint to make yours, is what I'm saying.
That's what
She's
that's what I'm
looking
kind
for-
of.
I could give you 5 different examples of
Yeah,
mine.
and then we customize it to what we think is right here.
We don't get to customize it.
me how much, of the taxpayers' money has been spent to this point on, the 2021 audit?
$7,000.
$7,000, how much have we committed to spend?
That I don't, I think it was.
Here's what I'm sure of, I can say this, it's not $7,000, so we only said we were gonna charge you 5, we haven't billed a dime more than that, I can tell you that.
Well,
But
I
there
have-
might have been money committed to the 22 audit, which is
Yeah.
what Judith
I
is.
mean,
I have-
22.
Can I review some figures, you can correct me if I'm wrong? Keel Hood, whether, I think he's been paid $4,500.
43,
Um,
43.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay. Ron Smith, I don't believe you've been paid yet, 5,000, I'm talking just the 20.
We've been paid something, for sure.
You've been paid something, okay. Legal fees, as of 11/29/22, so that's the end of November, totaled 12,715. So when I add that up to this point, which does not include legal fees from November 29th, 22 to this date, and there's certainly gotta be some, we're at 22,215. Does anybody find issue with that number?
Yes.
No, any of these folks? FYI, Caraton, year 21-22, spent $2,625 on that audit. We're pushing 10 times more than they spent. Well, we may not be Caraton, we're not that far from Caraton,
Right.
right down the valley.
It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. It
And
is.
they have more, a greater population than we do.
Right.
This is our money. I mean,
Mine
really?
too.
Yeah,
Mine
yours
too.
too.
Yep.
Maybe you like to waste your money, and mine, I mean, this whole thing is unnecessary if you've been doing your jobs to begin with. That's my perspective. All unnecessary, the whole thing. And I think anybody here would agree. We wouldn't be here today if you had done your jobs properly and sought out best practice and figured out how to do it properly instead of just winging it and then ending up with this kind of situation and this kind of situation.
There's a
It
lot
could have
of-
all been avoided. That's my opinion.
So Sandy, comment on that. If you have issue with what he just said, could you give us your
I'm
perspective?
best not to comment at this time.
And Chris, I saw you shaking your head. Do you have a comment? I'd like to hear your
I can say that
comments.
since I've been in the town, that these practices, there's been everything's been done in the office. There's been corrections that have been done to us. There hasn't been, these bad practices haven't existed since I've been.
So can I ask a question? So how often do you do payroll now?
Payroll is bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly, and no other advances going forward?
We do not, every officer is paid one stipend monthly. No advance.
I thought
One
it was
stipend.
bi-weekly.
No, hourly paid, salary employees like the officers are paid once a month. The hourly, like the landfill attendant, the mower, are paid bi-weekly. We used to have a bus driver, that was paid bi-weekly. All right, the officers, treasurer, clerk are paid monthly.
So
one
this is
month.
going forward, this is
Yes,
current. and
there's
going
no
forward.
advances going forward.
And that's in a meeting somewhere, it's recorded that that's how payroll will be done. I mean, you've discussed this at a meeting and it's in the minutes.
Angela, do you agree with that statement? You're the treasurer.
Yep, so at the beginning of the month, we pay the officers,
Mhm.
and then Chris Van, the dump attendant,
Mhm.
landfill attendant, and then in 2 weeks, we pay them again, so it is bi-weekly. So there's no advances, however, I mean, you could look at it that we are getting paid at the beginning of the month for work.
So you're paid in advance then?
Right, so we
Once
are
a
getting
month, once a
paid at the
month.
beginning of the
That doesn't make any
month for the work that we're doing that month.
That's a
that
great
month.
deal.
What would you suggest? What would be a good?
Well, I get paid in my position, I get paid after I've done my work.
Yeah.
Same here.
No
Okay.
one is
It's been
paying
my
anything in
employment
advance.
history.
I mean, hourly so when you do the bi-weekly payroll, that must be current though, that isn't in advance, correct?
No, that's, the time sheets are handed in.
That's
and
right,
it's
so
paid.
why aren't the
Yeah.
officers' positions paid after you've done a month?
Officers are elected
Uh-huh.
and the salary is
Uh-huh.
for a 12-month period.
Mhm.
the easiest way to distribute the salary is to divide it by
Well,
12
what if you,
and
what if
issue
you leave?
a check for 1 month.
What do you do
At
if
the
you
end of the month.
So-
just decide?
What happens, payroll has been run at the beginning of the month and all the officers are paid that amount on a monthly basis. So
In advance,
that would be for the month, correct?
coming forward.
So you could technically, yes, you could say that that is advance because you're paying for the month at the beginning of the month.
I don't, okay, well, we can discuss this at some other time, but
So
that
you
doesn't
have,
make any sense.
you have your annual amount, you can decide how, the voters can decide how, that's gonna be dispersed to the officers.
Okay,
However, for years, and again, there are a lot of practices that have carried forward,
oh, I'm sure there
that
are, and I
are
don't have an
not-
issue with that.
Yep,
because it
that are
hasn't been
not,
decided.
that is just something that has just been something that has been kind of part of the culture.
Well,
Not that
needs
it's
to
right,
stop,
wrong, or
yeah.
indifferent.
Right,
Okay.
exactly, I agree.
We had a very big issue, and Ron can speak to this as well, with timeliness and people being able to do work off-site and not in the computer, which created a pretty large percentage of this problem.
Absolutely. It, I mean,
And
that
the
is,
fact that
did everyone know that? Did you know that was
Whose
happening?
authority did they do that?
I was aware that the then treasurer had the ability to do work from home,
On her own computer?
but I
It
was
wasn't on her
not,
own computer.
I was not aware of what she was doing at home. That, that honestly was up to the first assessor to talk to the treasurer about.
It was up to me to oversee what she was doing.
And how was she doing it at home if she wasn't using a computer?
She was handwriting checks at home.
Well, she was using her own computer.
It
And
said in the
Well,
report, it was her own computer.
so, number one. So, number two, again, at that point in time, when the issues compounded,
Mm-hmm.
when people fall behind and they have to catch up with work,
Right.
Trio is a pretty unforgiving system when it comes to entering
It should be,
information.
any accounting system doesn't like it when you're
So
backdating stuff.
when you are entering backdated information,
Mhm.
it all goes in the same place and it all adds to the same year.
Mhm.
And the problem is
That's
the back,
right.
and the problem is the backdated information didn't even have the right back dates.
Exactly.
Okay, so here we sit with, the thing that you can look at, which one of my suggestions for the warrant this year was to put in the warrant article to raise a salary for da-da-da, to be distributed monthly
Mhm.
for second assessor or whoever.
Right.
But if you feel that that is advancing money to an individual, then that's, should be open for discussion.
Right.
Our hourly employees, especially those folks that cover the landfill, current with the mowing
Right.
has changed, that's now an employee under the town, it's not a subcontractor, and they'll be getting paid bi-weekly
Mhm.
or,
Right.
because basically the people that are gonna be in place filling out timesheets and time cards, that all goes to Sandy. Sandy now creates a documented list of who's getting paid, their hourly rate, their salary amount, and the total amount. And that's given to Chris and I via email. We both review, approve it. It goes then to Angie. Angie then processes it. Once Angie has processed the list, Sandy then takes it, compares the checks to the check numbers on the warrant, to the time frame that it's filed for or processed for, the date on the warrant, and then puts the checks in the envelope and in the mailing out the door. The treasurer no longer has autonomy over the entire process, which was it was the biggest issue we had or have had with past treasurers. There has to be a segregation of duties within the town, again, tax collector, second assessor.
Right.
There also has to be segregation of the processes in the town, so that checks and balances are created for different individuals.
Exactly. I mean, we all assume.
It has
on the
always
same time.
been the treasurer and the
Assuming.
first assessor's job to work together. It has been always the first assessor that's looked over the treasurer. Since the prior treasurer left, we've had a couple come in. Some of them have been a little, unsure of the process. We have some software issues in Trio.
Mhm.
Trio is working on those. We're gonna be working with, one of the accountants at Ron's office moving forward with getting the accounts back in line. There's a lot of things for the past 2 years because we haven't received information from the auditor. He didn't finish his job. He definitely did not supply the information that we needed moving forward. We have to put that all together so that when, if in fact this plan moves forward, the chart of accounts is revised and the budgeted amounts go in, so when the expenses are run, the debits and credits
That's right.
follow through,
Exactly.
they're
Just
accurate
like
and
you're
they
running a
balance.
business, the same thing.
So, again, there have been situations in the past where, more training has definitely been needed. This isn't a position that you're just gonna walk into and fluff your way through. You have to understand how to balance a checkbook.
Yes.
You need to understand what debits and credits mean, and you also need to be able to identify your own errors and correct those. We are still sitting on 3 pages of work, that needs to be adjusted in the system. You know, we have really been working closely with RHR Smith, and they've been advising us on what to do and what not to do. And until they got a really good handle on what was happening and what they could put their hands on physically when they came in, you know, this whole process has been forensic. So it's been very involved, very detailed, and there's been a lot of information that's been reviewed.
Susan?
I feel like we are throwing the past treasurer under the bus. And I wanna know why was, if she is the root cause of all these issues, why was she training the person that, preceded Denise? Why was she here for days? We all saw
Training
vehicles.
everybody.
Or
She was here.
Betraying most of us.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, so if she is so bad, why, I just need to find out, why did you guys hire her? Or, I don't know if she was paid, nobody seems to know.
Is that question being directed at me or them?
I'm not sure,
Well, I can tell you this, I'm not throwing her under the bus, you know, but I think that was problematic, but I think there were many other problems next to the treasurer.
Right, so
Yeah.
she's not here to defend herself, and I feel like, you know,
Well, just for the record, Joyce has been informed of all the conversations, of all the goings on. She decided that she did not wanna come tonight. And so, when Joyce was brought back in, she was asked to come back in and just basically guide through the folks through the Trio system. So she was the person that basically sat on site and held their hand through the processes. Again, with various internal controls changing and her not having the autonomy to make decisions about payroll or anything else, the board felt that it would be advantageous for the people moving into these positions to have her knowledge.
And by her own admittance, she wasn't comfortable with Trio, she was not comfortable.
Joyce wasn't?
Yes.
Yeah.
But she was here training people unsupervised.
Just tell her she was
She
not
was not
comfortable with herself.
supervised that much.
That much.
Excuse me.
I think David has something to throw out.
Moving forward with all the new implementations that you're making, will there be a list of those and who's gonna make sure that they are followed? The recommendations, everything that you're making changes, is that gonna be made public, and if so, who's gonna hold your hand to the fire? Who's gonna be making sure that everything gets done?
That's why you have elected officials, that's why we gotta move forward.
So we do have second drafts of job responsibilities and job duties that are outlined and listed. They are in rough form. They basically got tabled last year because of all of this chaos. There's one for every position, including dam keeper, assistant dam keeper, lawn mower, clerk, tax collector, treasurer, all the board members.
I'm asking specifically the recommendations that are being made,
Yep.
the new implementations of what you are
Right.
implementing.
So those rough drafts have to be pulled out
Okay.
with this letter, and I haven't read it. Those that information has to be incorporated to the job descriptions. Once that's done, I don't know, because I will not be in place as a board member, but I would recommend that they're reviewed by Ron Smith and then feedback given to the board and all the officials.
And then brought up at an assessors meeting as we adopt them.
Yeah, reviewed and then publicly, made available for review. I would suggest that. I don't know.
Moving forward, this is.
I'd like to pose a question to the assessors. Is there anyone on this side who has caused any of this chaos? Is
On
the
which side?
chaos that why we are having this meeting, has anyone, this side, in the chairs here, have any of us been responsible for the chaos? Is it us?
I have no comment.
I think one of the biggest problems to me through this whole thing, particularly at the beginning, is I voted for all three of you, because I trusted you. And to me, my trust was betrayed, and continues to be betrayed. I'm hopeful, as the town moves forward, that we will be on a better track, and there will be implementation of these controls, and will be some way of making sure that, they follow through. That's really hard for, I think, for a voter to listen to this, and particularly everything that's going on in the last 10 or 11 months.
And the
Because I
reaction.
really, really trusted you guys. I voted for every one of you. And this is, it's still, I'm over the shock somewhat, but it still is very, very difficult.
Well, Charlie, I'm
You
sorry you
walked
feel
into
that
my
way.
place and told me that you were gonna get these guys out of office.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
You
You walked
know
into
what,
my kitchen
I don't
and
recall
said
that
that.
conversation.
It happened.
Chris, there's just been a lot of that, so let's just not go there.
Let's not bring it here tonight, please.
Be professional.
On a little different note, it's pretty obvious here, everybody like to see that report before the town meeting, so I'm directing this to Mr. Woodcock. So what's the process for the ability to get that town meeting moved, appeal to the assessors?
I don't understand.
I'd like to get the town meeting moved to a different time, until such time that we could see the report, so we know what's going on before the town meeting. So
Well,
do we ask the assessors to move that, or?
well, they would have that decision-making authority, but,
So that's the only way we can get it moved.
well, I guess the first question is, when are you gonna get this report?
Yes,
Right,
And-
exactly.
that's right.
No, I understand that,
When
and
did you get the report?
we got
We
it.
haven't even,
I haven't seen it.
Well, you might not have looked at it, but have you received it?
I don't know, I haven't,
I
my
haven't
phone
looked
is
in
in my
the-
vehicle. I haven't
Okay,
looked.
because that's always the best defense, is that you just don't know what's in it.
our
Well-
goal is to
So
get
you
it to
don't
you
have
as
to
soon as
say
possible.
anything tonight.
Our goal is to get it to you as soon as possible,
Okay.
okay?
Look, I don't know exactly how the sequence here was set up, but we got the report this afternoon. I think I got it this afternoon as I was on my way up, I think it's in my email here, and we'll take a look at it, but it's not as though this is the end of the conversation. You folks are gonna get this report, and from what Ron is telling me, the report is going to have a number of recommendations in it that will improve practices. You'll be able to see what they are. It's not an excuse, we just haven't gotten it until tonight. I mean, ideally, we might have gotten a little earlier, but it didn't happen that way. What I would say with respect to the work that Ron has done, he has, I mean, if you check with anybody, the state auditor's office, whatever, you'll know he's got an outstanding
I don't question
reputation.
that at
So
all.
we're going to get a good report. You folks will see the
So
report.
let me ask you this.
Sure.
As a taxpayer, if I have a question about this, can I call you, or can I call you?
Well,
Calls made to you in the past, we have not been able to speak to you.
Well-
Because you represent the board, not the townspeople, apparently.
well, I'm retained by the board. I represent the Forks, but I
Right,
work for the board, the Forks through the board. But I've had people call me up individuals call me up for legal advice with respect to the Forks. I can't get into that kind of a situation because If I did that, I'd be offering legal advice to everybody in the Forks. And so,
Well, as
I-
it pertains to this particular instance, we hired our own attorney.
I understand that. If you have legal
And
questions,
at an expense to us,
absolutely.
because we
But-
couldn't get any answers any other way.
Well, I mean, I have had a number of people learn how to work the Freedom of Information Act, the Freedom of Access Act. And you direct questions to the board. Oftentimes, I will take a look through and make sure that the responses are compliant with the Freedom of Access Act. I mean, that's the kind of role that an attorney who provides municipal advice does. We don't go out on the street and give advice to people on the street just because they happen
Well,
to be citizens.
I think that, I didn't expect that, but.
No, I can't.
We would ask you these questions tonight if we had had the information, since we haven't, are we?
Here's what I would do. This is just me being me for doing this for 35 years, because I've heard
Well,
everybody.
you have common sense.
I got no dog in this fight except to
That's
give you the
right.
best advice possible.
That's right.
I would have a town meeting on the 17th, and I would do two things on the 17th. Go over that report, so you guys had all plenty of time to
Article
read it.
1.
Well, Article 1, Article 2, to allow the town to spend 3/12 of its budget like it spent last year. Okay, those are the first two articles. I delay town meeting for at least a few weeks. That's what I would do
Well,
if I were
that
the
makes
Forest
total sense.
Plantation. That's what I would do.
Well, we don't have a right to do that, so.
You don't, the assessors do, I'm just telling everybody in this room what I
How
would
do
do
we
here.
appeal to them? Call for a special town meeting to delay the town meeting, or what the hell's the procedure?
But I think they heard what I would do if I were them.
Well, they didn't say to do it.
So, I see no reason
Right.
what the 17th has, as quite frankly, a placeholder to
Well,
make any
because we had to
decisions,
pick a
right?
date at the last assessor's meeting.
So, and I'm just thinking out loud, if I'm the assessors, you're gonna put some angry people in a crowd, because they're gonna vote the budget down. Okay, so that's not a good result to have at a town meeting. So how about we have a real good result? Let's sit here, let's talk about that letter as one agenda item on the 17th, and let's talk allow this town to continue to do business for 3/12 of its last operating budget. That's what I would do if I was the Forest Plantation. So,
That makes total sense.
Barb,
Yeah.
offhand suggestion, leave the annual town meeting as it stands, allow me to finish. At that time, hand out the information from Mr. Smith, and then have a special town meeting to address that.
No.
I think people need time to look at.
It would give you time.
We have to vote at the regular town meeting for all of the positions that we're voting on.
There's only a few positions that are up for voting, that are up for election.
Now, you've got clerk, second assessor,
That's right.
school board.
And one school board person. That's it, there's only three people.
Well, it's very important.
Treasurer too, don't we?
No, treasurer's in place.
We push back the town meeting just for this audit, because it is so.
I know.
Was
I
I
know.
treasurer?
Yeah, I think it is important.
Was she
It
appointed?
is.
Elected?
I think she was elected at a special town
You
meeting.
think she was?
I know.
I know she was, okay.
I don't know the date.
That's fine. That's
What you don't
fine.
understand is, if we delay the town meeting, we cannot do any
We can do
business.
it if we do
No,
it the way he
we
suggested.
cannot
Well,
do
what-
any
Well,
business.
3/12.
Excuse
Can't
me,
pay bills,
can you
can't do
please
anything.
allow Sandy to answer the questions?
Well,
Her
we already
comments?
covered that. We did.
We might get this letter in a week.
No, you can, all we have to do is sit down and agree and look it over and
Well,
pass it.
no, we haven't read it, we haven't read it.
And again, I'm just being me, giving everybody in this room advice, just giving everybody in the room advice. You wanna delay your town meeting. When you think about your town meetings on the 17th, so what's gonna happen between July 1st and July 17th?
Well, we're gonna hopefully get the letter.
Whenever you get the letter, though, the town's still gonna conduct business. Town's still gonna spend money on a budget you haven't even voted on yet. That makes no sense to me.
No.
Zero. So I would just sit down, let Tim and I talk with this board of assessors. Let's just talk about something that makes sense, so we don't come in a room on the 17th and get a budget voted down to begin with. That doesn't make any sense to me. We're all on the same team, we all know we gotta heal. So I think that Tim and I can really sit here and talk with this board and really give them something that makes some sense, so that the town can start healing, town can start moving in the right direction, and the town can improve the budget.
It
That's
needs to
really,
do that.
I agree.
It needs to do that.
completely agree.
We voted for everyone.
I have 3 Forks plantations right now that have gone on, and all 3 have listened to me and done exactly what I've said.
Yes, I'm listening to you, but that's not what, Barbara suggested, so.
David, what's up?
First, thank you very much. Will we be able to get the books prior to the meeting as well, and go along with that?
We're waiting for the audit report.
We need the 22 fiscal year audit to go in the book, we were not going to print without the full audit report.
But we did last year.
Ron assured us tonight that it would be done, next week, so it's gonna hit the printers. And the reason why we had to go last year, it was because Keelwood refused to give us the report.
So we can expect that before the meeting itself?
As soon as we get
It's
them on.
currently, yeah, I think at this point, now wait, next week is the 4th, the week of the 4th, so his report is
We got some
due
work to do.
by the 10th.
We
We're
got some work to
expecting
do.
his report by the 10th. It's going to Augusta to the printers on the 11th. It will be done by either Thursday or Friday at the latest, so then someone's gonna go down, pick it up, and then distribute, like.
You'll get them as
we do.
soon as we get them, I promise.
Okay, I just like to make sure we have a day or two to review it before the meeting, so, as long, with the same lines.
Oh, this is what's gonna happen this year, because they're not gonna be printed until Friday, and the town meeting is Tuesday. The warrant will be posted 7 days prior. The warrants have to be posted.
I understand your position, all of you. I understand that. You certainly must understand our position. It's just,
But to delay town meeting would be, we wouldn't be able to pay salaries and.
I don't think you can now.
No, I was gonna
It's
say.
17 days out, I don't think you can
It
now.
makes no difference at this point, after.
Do you guys
June
have an
30th.
article? Because I didn't see it if you did. Is there an article to use 312? Nope, okay, so I don't think you can now.
No, after June 30th, that's it, nothing's getting
That's
paid,
right.
there's no
That's
checks,
right.
there's no, anything that
And
and
happens
that's
is
not a good
frozen.
situation.
And that's why I say the 17th is irrelevant. Hold the 17th, pass 312, let's talk about this letter, let's talk about the next budget, so we can get in another room another day and heal and pass a budget. That's what I would do.
Agreed. I agree, no, that's a good idea.
But our board has to agree with that
Well,
too.
let me just say, from my perspective, I should have this letter. I've been told it's in my email, and I will take a look at it. I will make a priority of looking at that. I'll look at it as soon as I can, and consult with the board, consult with Ron, and from my perspective, I'll commit to you folks, I'll do whatever I can to get it processed as quickly as possible, so you folks will have it. I think the points that everybody's making, they want it sufficiently in advance of the meeting, so they can really review it and understand it. I agree with that. I think you should have it.
It's only like that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's
It's
very
been a year
reasonable.
and we've not gotten any information when we were supposed to have it, and we were supposed to have it tonight.
Nobody told us it wasn't gonna be here tonight.
No, I mean,
Why
it's
surprise?
just an ongoing
Makes
thing.
you,
You
makes
wonder
them
why we don't have any pay.
conspiracy theorists more conspiracy theorists.
There's no conspiracy theory.
And here's what I'm sure of.
I haven't even.
Anything in
looked
that
at it.
letter has been talked about tonight, I can assure you that, and probably to the nth degree.
That's good.
All right. We'll get it to you as soon as possible.
Well, what we all hear, all the time.
Just say potentially, we were able to get it to you within a week. And it's
Why would it
just,
take a week?
I mean, all right, say
You
we
can
were,
probably read the letter.
say we were able to get it to you in 3 days. Well, I personally have a long weekend, and I'm going to have to look at it after the weekend, because I'm gonna be working. From now, I'm supposed to be working.
Well, all of us are,
Right,
Chris.
and so this is what we manage, and that's how we do it, and
We
we
used
just
to
got
have
this
town
today.
meeting in March, when we all had plenty of time
And if
to
we had
do
all
it.
the information, and if we had all this stuff taken care of, the town meeting would just happen. But this is holding it all up.
Yes, it is.
I mean, so this process has to happen, and then we can move forward. I'm in full agreement that you guys deserve to have this presented to you before the town meeting, so you have adequate time to like draw your questions and do whatever
And
you
if
need.
we don't get any of this information, and town meeting is still slated for July 17th, what do we do as townspeople going into that meeting to keep from voting on everything until we feel comfortable with the information.
I think you still have town meeting on the 17th, so I'm crystal clear, you know, but I think that
Well, I
there's two
like your
things that you
idea.
talk about, and then I think you you postpone to another town meeting.
But already, Article 1 is not it's not this matter.
No, it's not, because that's why we're having this.
No.
Well, it seems to me the best way to do this is if you guys
That's
could
the letter.
do your work with that letter and get it to us as soon as
Right.
possible. I don't think we need 3 weeks to look at it. If
No,
we had it
no.
a week before
No,
town
no, no.
meeting, wouldn't that be
No, no.
adequate for us to
Yes.
look at it?
I think someone just said 3 days, so, I mean.
Well, we're going to get the town report 3 days before town meeting,
Seven.
if I understand it correct.
As soon as we can get it,
Yeah,
there's
but
been holdups.
Can I make a suggestion? When the board is done reviewing the information from Mr. Smith, if we could have how many registered voters, taxpayers for the Forks Plantation want that report, and I would say one per household. You know, Sheila, and Chuck, you get one, Charlie and Sue, you get one, so on, all right? Let me know, I will make copies, I will set a date and a time that I will be here, and then you can come and pick.
Better
You
yet,
pick 'em
post it on the website. I mean, seriously?
I'm gonna tell you about the website, Susan, all right? Sandy has now been trying since our last school board meeting, which was in June, to get the the July, August, and September meetings off of the website. Because you give it to the web person, it doesn't mean it's gonna happen overnight.
I can do it for you.
We have our own.
We have our own.
Of course, who is ineffective.
No.
You know how much outdated stuff is on that website, but anyway.
Oh, you're
that's
100%
different.
correct, but it's on every other website that I've looked at too. But that isn't the point, okay? The point is, I am willing to go overboard to help this town as soon as this report is ready. As long as I know how many copies we need. Charlie, what are you laughing at?
I'm not laughing.
Well, what are you smiling at?
We will get these to you as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And, you know, town meeting already will have a set warrant. There's a lot we have to deal with and work with already.
Are you all good with me?
Yep.
Any other questions?
Thank you for stepping in and helping us out.
Glad to be here. Glad to.
Thank you. What time is it?
So it's my understanding that you're doing the current
Audit,
audit
yeah.
too.
I make a motion to adjourn at 7:15. I made a motion to adjourn at 7:15.
Second.